Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chapter Select, a seasonal podcast where we bounce back and forth between a series exploring its evolution, design, and legacy. For Season 4, we are covering the Fast and Furious series. My name is Max Roberts, and I am joined, as always, by Logan Moore. Hi, Logan.
Max, we haven't recorded in almost a month, but it seems pretty appropriate that this is our first recording we're doing again, considering that Fast 8 is all about daddies, and you're now a daddy.
I am. This is the first podcast I've recorded since becoming a dad, and this movie is all about becoming a father, unbeknownst to oneself, but yes, also about becoming a father. So I would like to report that the first time I held my child was not, behind bulletproof glass. There was no airplane tracking or anything like that.
Did your baby mama get off on this?
No, it was all normal. No family quite like Dominic Toretto's. So
well, let me ask you this: would you turn against me if your child's fate was hanging in the balance?
Yes. Yeah. Unwavering loyalty to my child.
Wow.
That and I've known the child longer than Dom knew the child. So.
I was going to say, you've only known her for like 3 weeks. We've known each other since we were little kids. I was showing you pictures the other day of us at like my 7th birthday party.
But I would never actually betray you. I would just secretly betray you. And you would know that I wasn't really betraying you, that there was a reason for my betrayal. And then we'd meet in an alley and have a nuclear football, and it'd be a great moment of trust.
Yes. Max, this movie's pretty dumb. Now that we're talking about all these things, this movie's pretty dumb. And
This movie is... Yeah, it's pretty dumb. It's pretty dumb.
We'll get into it. We'll share our impressions here, but let's first break down all the key things that we typically do here on Chapter Select. Fate of the Furious, which is poorly spelled.
They had a golden opportunity, man, and they didn't take it.
No, I think that's well documented. I think we've brought that up multiple times throughout this season, actually, that it should have been F8 of the Furious, but, I lay that one at the feet of F. Gary Gray, who directed the film. Fate of the Furious came out on April 14th, 2017. It was produced once again by Neal H. Moritz, Vin Diesel, Michael Fottrell, and Chris Morgan. The writer this time around was Chris Morgan. The primary actors in the film included Vin Diesel, Michelle Rodriguez, Tyrese Gibson, Chris Ludacris Bridges, Nathalie Emmanuel, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, Kurt Russell, Jason Statham, and Charlize Theron. This cast is getting a little bloated, and we don't even have Paul Walker in it this time.
I didn't even write down that I'm blanking on his name now. Eastwood's kid's in it. Scott Eastwood's in it too.
Yeah. The composer once again was Brian Tyler. The stunt coordinator was J.J. Perry, Spyro Razatos, and Troy Robinson. And the budget for this film was around $250 to $270 million, which Max, you wrote, is tied for the 17th most expensive movie ever made.
Along with Furious 7 and a bunch of other movies.
So they invested a lot in this movie, but they made back about $1 billion in profit because this movie grossed $1.236 billion worldwide.
Not as much as Furious 7, but still over $1 billion.
Which is pretty impressive because Furious 7 obviously had the added, everything surrounding Paul Walker there, which is why I think that movie made so much money. But the drop-off here between films was not that vast. So the Rotten Tomatoes score on this one, critics rated this one at a 67% overall aggregate score. Audiences gave it a 72%. And yeah, I don't know if you have any history with this one. I obviously do not. Now we're nearing the part where these films are a little bit more fresh in my brain. This movie is only a little over 5 years old, so I kind of remember the trailers that I've seen for these movies now.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So, I knew that the plot of this one was Vin Diesel turning against the family and teaming up with Charlize, but that's about it.
Did you know why?
No. So I did not know the daddy twist.
We'll talk about that.
Which we'll obviously talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, I wrote down all caps in my notes. Dom is a secret father. 3 question mark. I did not know that. That was one thing that I straight up did not know.
I'm glad that was a surprise.
So yeah, that was a surprise. But What's your own history? Anything special here? Just another Fast movie you saw in theaters, I assume?
Yeah, exactly. I'm well in the train now, I'm since Too Fast. So it's just, I'm here, day one, let's go. It was the pitch of Dominic Toretto as a bad dude now was always interesting-ish. It's like a little spicy. Like, all right, cool.
I mean, you're 8 films in, you got to find ways to mix it up, obviously, while keeping the same. I mean, previously, the ways they mixed it up was like Tokyo Drift. Let's introduce new characters and do something new. They're not going to deviate from the core family group now, so you got to find other ways to mix it up. So in this movie, they make him a secret father. In the next movie, they give him a secret brother.
All your favorite type of plot points.
Yeah, all my favorite classic Uncharted 4 style plot points. I mean, yeah, let's just get right into our own impressions. I think this movie is not good. I think this is bottom tier Fast stuff. I would put this below 7, below 6. Of the new era, like Fast and Furious, Fast 4 onward, this is bottom 2. It's Fast 4 and Fast 8 are the two worst. I prefer 5, 6, and 7. I think this movie is booty cheeks in a lot of ways.
I don't disagree at all. It is low on the totem pole out of all of them, really. But it's that good trash. Like, it's good trash. It's bad, but it's good trash. Entertaining trash, maybe, is a better way to put it.
This was my biggest problem coming into this, and this is something that I've gotten used to from Fast 6 onward. Like, Fast 6, I think the plot was very cliched, and it was not that great, but it was filled with so many good action sequences. I think the action sequences in this movie are pretty underwhelming and not particularly enjoyable, which was the thing that surprised me the most while watching it. I wrote down, one of my notes was just, wow, this movie is surprisingly boring. Like, which I think was the thing that caught me the most off guard, because I'm obviously, at this point, I know what the series is. I know they're just kind of fun popcorn films. I know what I'm signing up for. It's just going to be mindless action fun where we're watching superheroes in cars, basically. Like, and I'm not expecting anything more than that. But as far as the action sequences go, yeah, I really do feel like this is some of the worst of the modern series here. So
it is, especially coming off of Furious 7, because Furious 7 built really well. This sequence leads into this one, leads into this. This movie kind of has 2, 3 major set pieces. They're very far apart, and then a couple of fights in between. And one fight in particular is excellent, but it's disjointed compared to previous films. It's almost like Furious 6 in that way, where it was like, here's the tank, here's the plane, but these set pieces don't feel as good. They're not as, they just feel too disjointed, not as entertaining.
They're very singular in how they are carried out, too. Like, at least in Fast 6, the one thing I really liked about that is that there's a lot of moving parts. Like, I think about the plane sequence in the end. You've got some people in the plane that are fighting, and you've got fist fights going on with Dom and some others. And then outside the plane, you've got them trying to shoot the wings and keep it from flying off. And, like, you've got different things going on in different spots. They're all part of the same set piece, but there are different pieces of action going on that are keeping things somewhat interesting. You got, what's her name, Giselle, flying off into the void. And this, like, the final set piece is very much just, oh no, there's cars chasing after us on ice, we got to run, and now there's a submarine. Like, everything that is happening at the same time to everyone, if that makes any sense. And there's really nothing else, no other variables within these action sequences that really change things up in interesting ways.
The only time that 2 things overlap really is toward the end with the airplane and the submarine, but they don't directly impact each other.
Yes.
And so it doesn't feel as good. I was just thinking, kind of really, if we take these set pieces and associate it with the plot, it's actually a lot like Fast and Furious 6. In Fast and Furious 6, Owen is collecting pieces to build some sort of device. In Fate of the Furious, Cipher is collecting pieces to build some sort of device. But in Furious 6, those events flow naturally together. They culminate in the bad guy being captured, but then running away, and it all weaves together. But this movie just feels, you don't really know what Cipher's up to until the end. And her whole thing is, they will notice me. But you've been a secret hacker your whole life. And so her motivations never land or connect.
She's a really poor villain. And I'm actually pretty not thrilled that she is going to be reappearing in Fast 9. And then I know she's still alive at the end of that movie in Fast X. She's going to be back again. I'm not enthusiastic about this. It feels like they got Charlize, similar to how they got Jason Statham to play Deckard Shaw. And they're like, oh, well, we got a huge big name actor. We can't kill him off. We can't get rid of him. Not that they've been necessarily killing off villains left and right in this series. Like Owen's still around and he shows back up in this movie. So it's not like they really write out the villains entirely, but it feels like they scored Charlize in this movie and they're like, oh, well, it's Charlize. She's a huge big name actress. We have to make sure she sticks around and remains a major player moving forward. And yeah, her character is not great. That's one of my big problems with...
She's a huge problem in this movie.
She's so... This is one thing I'll say as far as the villains. The past couple villains we've had in all these movies have been directly involved with the plots. And that would include kind of Fast 4 onward. Fast 5, maybe not as much, because it's just kind of another... I forget his name, but he's just kind of crime boss, and they're enacting a plan against him. But that movie's even got, Hobbs in it. So that's even a little bit more of a direct conflict where they're facing off against a direct opponent, which would be Hobbs, and then you have Owen in 6, and then you have Deckard Shaw in 7. Her, the whole time, she just hides away in her plane. And she just kind of is up in her ivory tower, is distanced away from everything else, and they're like, we got to take her down. And she's like not really directly involved at any single point with the conflict with the family. And I guess Dom kind of is the surrogate for that, and so Dom is the pseudo villain in the movie of sorts, but that doesn't really work because know he's not really bad, and he's at the end of the movie he's gonna be the good guy again, and he's gonna save him, and you're more interested in figuring out how he gets out of this hold that she has on him. So the stakes feel very low. And to introduce her as this big bad that's going to carry forth into other movies, they don't do a good job of it. I think if they would have maybe saved this plot line for, let's say, Fast 9, where she then turns Vin against them, then that would have been more effective. But to introduce a new villain that you want to be the big villain of the franchise moving forward, and then she doesn't do much, and the actual villain is kind of Dom instead, it just doesn't work. Yeah, I don't like her in this movie.
Cipher strikes me as Fast and Furious' attempt to have like an overarching puppet master villain, kind of like in James Bond with Blofeld and Spectre, or in Mission Impossible with Solomon Lane, like controlling a bunch of stuff and being in multiple movies is kind of the one pulling all of the strings. But she just never connects, and her plots never really jive or make sense. Her whole thing here is just to get a nuke and like intimidate world superpowers. There's just nothing. We're getting to super spy evil villains that don't necessarily connect with the plot of our characters here. It just feels disjointed.
And how do you feel about this is a movie franchise that has obviously been going bigger and more ridiculous but I feel like this was really the movie where I felt like it is now officially getting too big and too outlandish for its own good in some ways. And I know that it's only going to continue upping the ante moving forward with some of the other movies, and that's kind of the MO of the franchise at this point. But when I realized that nukes were now in play and was like the key plot device in this movie, like I essentially just rolled my eyes. Like it's getting so outlandish that like there has to be a fine line. There has to be a fine line between you taking this seriously and it being so far gone in stupid town that it can't even engage you in a serious manner. And I'm somebody who likes really dumb stuff, so I don't mind like a good comparison. We talk about this a lot, like amongst our friend group. Not you as much, but like Yakuza is a great example of this. Totally goofy games. Have a very aloof tone throughout much of the game, but they also tell these really serious, compelling plots with interesting characters that have a lot of depth. And I feel like the plots of these movies are getting so outlandish that the characters are now kind of getting lost in the shuffle.
It just doesn't feel like it fits with the Fast family. We've gone from stealing things kind of in the first 5 movies. 4 really was busting a drug lord, and 2 was as well. But like stealing things and having some sort of villain or bully in that way, to 6 being spy thing, and Furious 7 also kind of really bringing us into this spy world with Mr. Nobody and stuff. But Nukes strangely feels like one step too far beyond something like God's Eye, where we can track anyone anywhere.
Yes.
Nukes just feel like one thing too much.
God's Eye was used as a plot device in the last movie to, find Deckard and then take him down. And so it was still a personal conflict at the end of the day. Nukes, it's like, okay, if this lady wants nuclear weapons, why are we enacting a team of street racers to take her down? Like,
why is she hiring a street racer to steal the nukes?
Yeah, it's just getting so...
It just feels not connected.
It's getting too absurd for its own good, which again is something that I have liked about the series a lot so far. But there has to be a line. There has to be a dividing line between going... And they're just too far past it at this point. And I imagine that's not going to get any better in the future movies. So
your imagination would be correct. Just
especially since I already know Fast 9 is the secret brother movie, the Uncharted 4 plot device. I think what's so funny about this too is that even though they are getting so crazy with what the narratives of these movies are now and like what the actual goals are. This movie starts off once again with street racing. It tries to keep things rooted with street racing, at least in some sense, with all these movies.
Yeah.
And I think the street race is actually really fun in this one because he's racing a piece of junk and he's driving backwards and a car blows up and like all kinds of dumb stuff happens in this race. And that's fun. So the street races to me are emblematic of them being like, we have to acknowledge our roots. We have to continue to acknowledge what this series is and where it came from. And racing has to be at the center. But it's proving to be such a bizarre dichotomy now. Where this movie starts off with, Dom, and he's still a street racer at heart. And then as soon as that scene is over, it jumps to, Charlize getting involved and he's now a double agent and everything from there on feels so silly.
Exactly. I in the behind the scenes for all the stunts and stuff, F. Gary Gray talked about how fans wanted more street races and being tied to the roots. So it feels like they just made this cold open.
Yeah.
That's really disjointed from the rest of the film, except for the one character cameo later who you realize, he helped in New York City. He was there. So this guy came from...
He earned his respect, so this man now crossed countries and parked a car at one single spot.
Exactly. So besides that, the race means nothing. There's no real callbacks. It's just kind of a character thing for Dom, because right after that scene, there's one quick scene with him and Letty talking about becoming a dad or whatever, and then we run into Cipher, and bam, we're off to the races. Like, it's just... I wrote down, we waste no time after the cold open to the villain and reason for Dom's turn. And it's not until 48 minutes into the movie that you learn that the blackmail or the leverage is his son. So
yes.
It's, if you cut the cold open, the movie is fine. It doesn't need it at all. And it's a great race. It's fun. There's even a good Brian reference in it, the Buster's Poor Man Turbo, like his nickname for Brian, like calls it out. It's nice, but feels out of place.
The series feels like it's like at odds with itself now. They don't know what to do. They don't know if they want to keep it rooted to what it's always been, or in some senses, they're like, as soon as we started going to Crazy Town with Fast 5, that's when we started to make a lot of money. So we got to continue upping the ante and making things more and more crazy. But also, we've had these fans from the first 3 or 4 films that have stuck with us. Yeah, I don't know. It's just totally going against this stuff. We've already talked about Charlize a little bit and her character Cipher and why she doesn't work. I don't know if there's a lot more else we need to say about her right now. I do want to point out that her dreads or whatever the freak she has in this movie are horrible. Mm-hmm. Please don't wear your hair. Please don't wear your hair like that again, Charlize. It's very terrible. At first, I thought she was just like wearing her hair like that because she was like trying to blend in when they were in Cuba or something like that. I was like, what is she trying to look like, a local white lady who got her hair dreaded up or something? And nope, she just wears it like that the whole movie. I'm like, okay, sure.
You let me know which hairstyle you prefer after F9. Okay, you let me know.
Oh no, I'm scared now. Yeah, so we've talked about her a little bit. I think that one of the things that I would like to hone in on a little bit more is the character. We typically, with our discussions of these movies, I feel like we've gone character by character and talked about their own personal arcs that they have in these movies. This movie might be the worst in the entire franchise when it comes to various character arcs. I feel like there is no good characterization in this movie whatsoever for any of the main cast members, other than Hobbs and Shaw. Those are the only two. They're the only two. They are the only ones. And I will say Mr. Nobody. So I was pretty flat on Mr. No. We can talk about this more a little bit later. I was pretty flat on him after Fast 7. I do think he gets better in this movie. Okay, I do like him more after Fast 8. But Hobbs and Shaw are really the only two that I felt anything for this movie. Like, Tej and Roman really get nothing. Roman
gets a lot of comedy.
Well, Roman saves the final action scene in a lot of ways. But up until that point, I feel like he's even pretty flat throughout most of the movie. And he's just kind of there and cracking off one-liners typically. And him and Tej's whole thing the entire movie is trying to flirt with Ramsey. Like they've just kind of become very one note, and I feel like they don't do much else in this. Ramsey's just kind of there. She's like, I'll try to out-hack the hacker, and Cipher's always like, no, I'm the better hacker. So she's really doing nothing. Letty's whole role in this movie is just saying, I still believe in Dom. She's extremely one note. Like, just Hobbs and Shaw are the only two. Like, it was after I watched this movie, I was like, oh, I know how they got a spinoff now. It makes sense to me. And that's because they take time to flesh out Hobbs way more, not only with his whole soccer mom opening sequence, which is great, and the Taylor Swift references, going to Tay-Tay concerts.
A lot of Tay-Tay concerts.
Him, and then obviously all the banter between him and Shaw when he goes to prison is excellent. The prison scene is maybe my favorite scene in the whole movie.
It's the best scene in the movie.
And it centers entirely around them. Yeah, they are the only two in the movie that I felt like got any like worthwhile characterization or great character moments that I was like, wow, this will stand out within the larger series compared to what I've seen of them in the past. Everybody else is so flat and they don't do anything with them. And that's like, I don't even know what we would talk. Like, I just outlined everybody else, and like, I don't even know what we would go one by one and talk about everybody else within this movie. I just feel like there's nothing to even break down or dissect.
Yeah, I wonder if this is some growing pains, which is weird to say for a $1 billion franchise, but some growing pains after Furious 7 and losing a key member, reshuffling the dynamic a little bit. Where are we putting the spotlight? Where are we not? How does this balance? And then having your other main character be the villain, not his normal role, also feels a little weird. So it's all the relationships are
a villain that offed the primary character a couple movies before, or technically like 3 or 4 movies before, but he killed off Han, which I now understand the whole justice for Han thing, because they really are just like, like by the end of the movie, Dom is just very accepting of Shaw, like, oh, thanks, bro, for saving my kid. It's like, he killed your best friend. What are you? What?
Yeah, we'll save that part of the discussion. I want to save that a little bit, but the one of the things I wrote down, I mean, to really, I guess, get into it a little bit here in the flow, because after the phone call and the blackmail and stuff, they pull off a heist in Berlin or wherever. And it's kind of like the races in the past, like when Dom shows up in Tokyo, or the end of Fast Five where Brian and Dom are racing. But we don't actually see the full race or know how it plays out. We kind of just know inside. We know how the heist is going to go at this point. Like, they get away with the thing. Really, it's a setup for, I wrote it down, Dominic Toretto just went rogue. Having him take out Hobbs, pretty cool. And it sets up the prison thing. Mm-hmm. But I wrote down, really, the prison. This is the birth of Hobbs and Shaw. It's like a dry run for that movie, especially this beginning portion. Their conflict is so funny. The Rock has phenomenal lines and acting in this scene where he's, doing bicep curls with the bench.
They just cut bench. One of the scenes just literally starts with him just punching a cement wall.
Yes.
And he just does that for a good 20 to 30 seconds. And Shaw's like, oh, this is how you work out, huh? I'm like he's like belittling him for punching a cement wall, like as if that's nothing. I'm like, what are you talking about? What?
It is, the banter between them is phenomenal, and the prison break itself, all triggered by Mr. Nobody. It is triggered by Mr. Nobody because he's the one that opens the door, but then Hobbs stays in the cell. Anyway. Mm-hmm. The Rock just taking rubber bullets like they're nothing on his body. Shaw doing all of the parkour, slipping around, beating each other up. The two of them just...
The Rock does some parkour too. The coolest part is when he slides off of that banister into the steel cage and like bounces off of it down to the lower floor. That's awesome. He also has the best line in the entire movie, maybe one of the best lines in the entire series, where the guy says, I've been waiting a long time for this. And he says, keep waiting, bitch. And then he stabs him.
Yes.
That's one of the... It's a great...
I love the Cherokee drum line. Like, there's just excellent delivery here. If this was Hobbs's last Fast and Furious movie, numbered movie, what a great one to go out on. He is fully realized in this film, and having Shaw to play off of that throughout the whole movie is...
Yeah, I completely agree. I guess my big question, and maybe you could answer this, you would know, but coming off of Fast 7 and seeing how much that movie made, is that where it was then the brainchild of them creating spin-offs and then doing Hobbs and Shaw? Was that an idea they had before Fast 8 was made, I would imagine? Because the way that this movie is set up is that everyone does take such a back seat to Hobbs and Shaw that it almost makes me wonder if it was an intentional choice to make viewers latch onto those characters more, so that then when they inevitably created the spin-off Hobbs and Shaw movie, that would be something that people would naturally want to go see. Like, I feel like every other character in this movie may have been so poorly written and just bland as intent from the scriptwriter's perspective, because they knew that this was going to become a larger franchise with other movies outside of the mainline series. I don't know if you can have any insight on that or not. But
don't you worry, I just pulled it up. So back in November of 2015, 2 years before this came out, basically right after Furious 7, Vin Diesel announced to Variety that they had written out storylines for various characters, and announced they were developing spin-offs and prequels and things like that. The Marvel or the Star Wars route. So Dwayne Johnson has hinted in the past that he'd like his character Hobbs to branch out and do his own independent adventures. So these were ideas they were toying around with, and it seems like Fate of the Furious was a testing ground for Hobbs and Shaw to be put together, and it comes out clearly because they're the two that get the most shine, really.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to, I want to say that I mentioned this specifically with the last movie, with Fast 7, I believe, where it felt too much like a Hollywood blockbuster. All of the other films in the series have felt, I mean, obviously this is a bajillion-dollar franchise, and all of these movies have been made with the intent of making money, but 7 was really the first one that I felt like was like being created as a mass market product, and was something that was being done solely to make money rather than... There are decisions basically in Fast 7 and even more so in Fast 8 that I felt like were being made because of Hollywood executives were taking a big picture view of what the movie was going to then do in the future, rather than just saying, what's the best possible movie we could make? And I get those vibes a ton with Fast 8, Fate of the Furious here.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Outside of everything with Hobbs and Shaw, though, the big thing that we talked about a little bit earlier, but let's maybe dive a bit deeper, is Dom and his conflict with this movie and him having a child of his own now with his former lover, which, what was her name again?
Elena.
Yeah, with Elena. I think the idea of Dom being a daddy at this point is fine and is a natural progression of the franchise, and is something that makes sense. And I think even the whole blackmail idea with him also makes sense. But I don't know. I don't know if I love. It's just, yeah, I don't know. On paper, I think it's fine how it's implemented in this movie in some senses, but it just feels awkward at the same time with how it's all. It just comes out of nowhere. I guess there's nothing that's ever been hinted at it in the past, and it's clear that they just not necessarily retconned anything, but they just kind of pulled this out of nowhere because they're like, what should the next plot motivation be? Sure, we'll just do this. And
so at the start of Furious 7, if you remember the fight between Shaw, Hobbs, and Elena is like 3 months pregnant or something at that point. Clearly not the case when you look back at that movie.
I was just saying, then she gets blasted out a 10-story window or something like
so that. They play very loose with the 9 months of pregnancy. It makes sense-ish to have a kid. It was like, how do we get a kid? We can't really have Letty go through 9 months of pregnancy. Like, how do we get a kid now? And what makes the most sense? So we use Elena. Cool, fine. Everyone's obviously cool with each other in this dynamic, this relationship. Everyone is cool with each other. It just makes sense to have this kid here. And I like it as the motivation, because what else would get Brian to turn on everyone? The only thing would be a son.
The only thing, I do like the idea that the only thing he would turn his back on family for is family. Which is funny, because coming into this movie, I knew he would be bad. And I knew the whole, you're really going to turn your back on family? I remember that line from the trailers. I'm like, how could Dom betray family? What is the thing that would cause him to betray family? And it's family, which is funny. It just continues his character's through line, his morals, and the things he fights for to a T, which is very hilarious in some senses.
What do you think about I'm going to put quotes around it because who knows, but the killing of Elena?
You're going to put quotes around it? Dear Lord.
I mean, I'll tell you this. She is not in F9, but at this point, anyone can come back. So
yeah, I was going to say Han got blowed up, and I know he's in the next one. So Letty supposedly got blowed up too. Yeah, I don't know. It feels.
I feel like they did her dirty.
They definitely did her dirty, and because it feels like the moment that we have talked about in a lot of these previous movies, where it's like, we have to establish that this villain is actually very evil, and they're like, what's a way we can make it known that Cipher is a very bad lady? We'll just have her kill Elena, and they just have her do that, and that's. I mean. It's a decent motivation, I guess, for Dom, and it does raise the stakes of the movie somewhat considerably. But yeah, they do Elena very dirty. She's gone from being... Elena's a really good character in this series, and I think she's played a great role. And in this movie, she largely just becomes the mommy in distress, and she can't do anything. Obviously, she's captured and she's in a jail in a plane. So there's not a lot she can do.
A plane but she really that never has to land or fuel.
Yes, that too. I was going to say that, but I'm glad you did. She's just helpless this whole movie, and she's just kind of there to die. She plays no other. There's no other purpose in this movie other than for her to explain how the child exists and then die. And that's about it.
They fridge her pretty hard. It's bad.
Yes.
It sucks because she's so cool in 5. she doesn't really have a part in 6. And then in 7, she has a little bit of a role at the beginning of the movie. Like, felt like there was so much potential for Elena to be expanded upon, especially with Hobbs, not in a romantic relationship, but in a working relationship. So I was mad then, and I'm upset now still, just how dirty they do her in this movie. It sucks.
Other baby things we can talk about. I know we were going to talk about some more action scenes in a second, but we may as well talk about the action scene that the baby himself is involved in, which is great.
The second greatest scene in the movie.
Yes. The Kung Fu baby scene with guns.
And Alvin and the Chipmunks.
And Alvin and the Chipmunks. Yeah, the hula hoop song for some reason, which I don't know why they chose that song, but I'm also not complaining about it.
Yeah.
In the slightest. But that scene is excellent and really established. That's the best scene with Shaw in the whole movie, for sure. Even outside of his whole banter with Hobbs.
It's in there with the prison. It's up there with the prison scene, like, again, but I was going to say, it is his sole moment in the movie to shine by himself and to have some personality, and you get to see what type of person. I mean, it is very jarring though that he's gone from being this serious, hello Dominic Toretto, I'm gonna kill you now, oi, to now being like smiley killer baby and turns his baby around.
Was that you or him? Oh, it was him. Poop joke. Like,
he's made quite the pivot in one movie, right?
Yes, it is. It is a very. It's quite the difference. But that scene is so fun.
Yeah, so it's a blast. The car seat just sliding around, and
the baby smiling the whole time, and before he even goes out there, he's like, "We're gonna have some fun." And then he starts killing everybody. It's great. It's a lot of fun. It's silly. Like, that's the kind of silly I'm fine with in these movies. Like, but
what about Owen reappearing?
I don't even feel like there's that much to talk about. He just is kind of there.
I'm just curious if you even expected that. Obviously, he was alive,
I did.
But just like seeing him back.
Because that was the thing I talked about in 7. I was like, wow, Deckard Shaw is pretty off at Dom and the family, even though his brother is very much alive and fine. Like, so I figured Owen would come back in at some point. When I saw him show up, I was like, okay. I didn't really know what was going on when they first appeared. They cut all of a sudden, and there's 2 jetpack dudes flying towards this plane. I'm like, did I miss something? And then when they got there and put the pieces together, explained Dom's meeting with the woman.
Shaw.
Yeah, and explained who that was. It's like, okay. But it didn't even really do a good job. They just kind of show these things and left these things kind of hanging, and you don't really know what's happening for a good, 30 minutes, because he meets up with Helen Mirren's character, and you don't know who she is or why he's meeting up with her or what the heck is going on until a good 35 to 40 minutes later. Yep. And it's like, okay. But that makes that meeting at that part in the movie 30 minutes prior a little bit odd, because you don't really know what's going on in the moment. It's like, who is this lady? Why am I supposed to care about this interaction between these 2 characters? They don't really introduce anything to my knowledge. You don't know that that's
correct.
Deckard or Owen's mom at the moment.
You just know Dom is doing something.
He's just doing something, but you don't know what. And the payoff, I guess, is good, but it's a weird introduction to her character that you don't understand who she actually is until so much long later. The one thing I do want to talk about, and this is very obviously jumping to the very end of the movie, and it again involves the child. I don't like this kid being named Brian.
Neither do I.
I don't like it. I don't like it at all. It's too meta. It's a wink and nod at the audience more than anything, because in universe, Brian's not dead. Yeah.
It should have been, if they wanted to do that, it should have been Paul.
I agree. Paul was the way to go if they wanted to make it a nod to Paul Walker. Brian, far too on the nose. Brian is still alive. Mia is still alive. Their kids are still alive. They exist within this world. They're just out of the picture because they got their family. And I know Mia's in Fast 9, right?
She does return. This is the one she wasn't a part of. And I could probably look up an interview or something, but I think it was, they didn't know what to do with them, and having her be there without Brian, I don't know.
So Brian's still alive.
Yes.
So it's weird to just be like, oh, hey, my best friend who you would assume Dom, talks to, and he's still close with.
You would have assumed would have been at the party, right? To reveal reveal of his son. It's just, it should have been Paul.
It's a wink and nod at the audience and really nothing more. And I don't love it. I'm fine with him having a son. Don't like the name choice. Bad. Like when that happened, I was like as that, having that be the final moment of the movie was really like, oh no. Like I legitimately said out loud, oh no, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, that's not good. This is bad. This is very bad. So I don't know. I mean, I do like that they are trying. I do like that they're trying to continue to acknowledge Paul Walker's importance to this franchise in that sense, and trying to continue to acknowledge that, you know, yes, Paul is not going to be in any of these movies anymore, but he is a pillar of why this franchise is what it is.
Yeah.
But that's not the way to acknowledge that.
I like the scene in the movie where the team is down and out. They don't know how to deal with fighting Dom, and Roman's like, Brian would know what to do. And then Letty's like, no more. Like, that felt appropriate enough. It acknowledges him. It acknowledges the depth of Dom and Brian's relationship, but without having to draw him back into the life for obvious reasons.
And I think that was also, I mean, not to get too much in, because this is going to be a through line moving forward, is just the absence of Paul Walker. You know, like literally second note I wrote about this movie was, no Paul Walker in opening credits, sad face. I already miss him. Like, I think this plot of Dom turning against the family would have worked out drastically better if Paul was still in the picture. I think that would have been great, because him and Paul are the two that have always been the sort of equals. And Dom really didn't have anybody to directly, I guess Hobbs sort of was the direct person within the family that he was kind of squaring off with in some regards, because he's the one that he runs off the road and stuff like that. But it would have been, there would have been a different feeling about it if it would have been him and Brian, or the ones that are kind of at odds with each other in this movie. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to keep bringing this up. I mean, I'm sure I naturally will in perpetuity moving forward. It's not something I want to linger. It's not something I want to linger on. Like, oh darn, it'd be better if Paul Walker was in this movie, because like that's just a given. But it does suck. I mean, it just continually,
it's a factor,
will suck until all these movies are gone or over, or whatever the heck that happens at the end of the 11th movie, I guess. So
we'll see how it shakes out.
Let's talk about some of the other action scenes, though. So we've talked broadly about, I mean, we've talked about more of the like hand-to-hand combat scenes with the prison and the baby scene on the plane with the baby carrier. We haven't really talked about the car scenes, though, specifically the one in New York. This is the one I did not like at all, personally.
It's zombie time.
Yeah, this is the one that, to me, where I was like, this is one of our big set pieces in this movie. It's fine, I guess, but it's not. I think my big problem with this, and you can tell me if you're wrong, if I'm wrong, because you usually know these things. Well, I guess this is my problem both with this and the ending ice scene, is that the practical effects look much more limited in this. And I'm going to guess they did not have 500 cars all driving down the street at the same time. Maybe I'm wrong, but
so you're not entirely wrong. They do have cars. There's actually more practical effects than I thought. So the parts that were filmed in New York City, they were maxed out at 35 miles an hour, which is already limiting them. You know, they shut down major traffic and all that stuff. So that was interesting to deal with. The actual like explosion stuff, the pile up at the parking garage, that was in Cleveland. And that's a real parking garage. And they really launched cars out of a parking garage and piled them up below. They did not have hundreds of cars driving and crash. There were some car scenes where it was just one car or two that had no driver. I found this kind of funny. There were stuntmen dressed up as car seats driving those cars, like in car seat suits. And then obviously edited to, you know, look way better. So, but that's really it as far as practicality goes. And at least from the behind the scenes, like the stretching Dom's car out, which I think is the better part of the New York Chase. Like that doesn't seem to have any practicality to it of stretching and reversing those cars. Maybe it is, and it's just not in the behind the scenes. But the chase feels weird, and why do we have zombie cars? Why does she, it's a lot of just, I do like Dom taking on an armored limousine and just standing there with a shield and taking bullets. That's kind of silly.
Yeah, he goes full like army of two in that moment. Is what he is
cutting open the gas tank and getting ready to blow it up. Those guys are terrible nuclear football transporters. Are supposed to die for the football. They just kind of hand it out. The better part of this scene is the team against Dom, the stretch, him take the lines. He's got like 3,000 horsepower under that thing. Try 5, try 9. Like that's super dumb. And the way he takes out all the cars is fun.
That's Dragon Ball Z levels of goofiness for sure.
What's his power level? It's so good. And the chase and the split up and all that stuff. Him taking Roman out. Nah, my Bugatti. Or Bentley. This is Bentley. So
him fake taking out Shaw as well was very
stone cold.
Yeah. As soon as you saw Shaw die, I guess that would be the one problem is you see Shaw die like that, and it's like, okay, well, we saw him get shot off screen because by the time it cuts and you see the shot, he's already like falling on the ground. Over. It's like okay, well, he's clearly not dead, and obviously
Hobbs and Shaw is a thing that happens.
Yeah, Hobbs and Shaw is a thing, so that the stakes were really taken out of it. But even the way they showcase it in the movie, it's like, okay, well, clearly he's not dead, so how is he coming back here? And yeah, I'm curious to see. I mean, we've talked about this the whole season here on Chapters. Like, obviously have context for things that happen in the future. We talked a lot in like
You're running out, buddy.
Yeah, we talked a lot in Fast 4 about how like I know Letty comes back, so her death in that movie doesn't work for me. We're running out here. Like we got Hobbs and Shaw, which is just its own self-contained thing, I guess, and then Fast 9, and I have no context for future things after that, obviously. So this is the last one where it's really like, oh, they killed Deckard Shaw, and I clearly know that's not a thing that will happen. So will the stakes be higher when I watch the future films? I don't know, probably not. They're pretty choreographed with their plots and how they work and things of that nature, but I don't know. I guess we'll see. New York chase scene, it's not great.
It falls flat.
It's very flat compared to everything we have seen from Fast 4 onward. It is definitely lower down the tier list of action sequences. The submarine sequence, on the other hand, is fun. It has its moments.
There are different parts coming together. Part of the team's off looking for a chip. Another part's hacking a submarine.
But that stuff's not even that... I don't know.
It's not great, but there's some separation.
It just ends up devolving into them all running away on the ice and trying to get away, and you as the viewer knowing that, oh, well, Dom's going to become the good guy here again. But how? Because the movie is almost over. So what is going to happen? And then that leads into the whole baby sequence, which we talked about before. As for the actual chase itself, I wrote down Roman saving the movie per usual. Because everything that happened in the chase scene up until Roman falling in the water and then Tej pulling him out and then him getting up and smacking somebody with a door and then shooting out, like that whole part is great. Yes. And I was like, okay, Roman is still the one in this movie that is hilarious. And then he gets in the car with Hobbs, and then he's got a ton of great one-liners with that, where Hobbs is like, oh, just everybody get in front of me and we'll block it. And he's like, what? Like, that's
or
all
take
great.
The wheel when The Rock takes a missile and he takes
a torpedo and just pushes it. That's hilarious. There are moments in this scene which are good. I also wrote down Dom punches a man's neck in half because he throws the Game of Thrones man, the redheaded Game of Thrones man, down on the hood of the car, just punches his head straight down and it snaps backwards. That's pretty vicious. But yeah, otherwise I think, again, the stakes of this scene feel lowered because of a lot of what we talked about before. It's just Cipher up in the skies being like, I'm going to remote hack a submarine, woohoo! And then the submarine is chasing them. It's like, okay, I guess this is kind of a big crazy set piece here, but I don't feel like I know no one here is going to die, and the villain's up in the sky, and she's just kind of disconnected from everything, and okay, how are they going to get out of this? I even the action scenes themselves, outside of Roman's one-liners, I don't think there's anything like visually that interesting that happens in these scenes either. Like, I guess the sub blasting out of the ice and then them just getting away from it. Or I guess when she shoots the missile and then the missile, I mean, that would be the only part of the scene that is really visually.
He uses a car to take out a submarine.
Yeah, that's fun.
And then they form a car shield to defend him from fire.
Yeah, that part is funny, and I enjoyed that part there at the end. But other than that, it's really just continue kind of in the same way that Fast 6 was them on an endless runway. It feels like they're on an endless ice lake in this, and it's just them driving forward. Well, at least that's more
believable. Like a 27-mile runway is just not feasible, but a frozen lake is however big.
Well, she said, oh, our place we need to get to is only 10 miles away, and then they're on that ice for like 30 minutes, it feels like. And it's like, hey, you said 10 miles. You're all driving very fast here. I feel like you'd be there by now.
They really did film on a frozen lake. They spent 6 weeks in Iceland, and they really filmed a Lambo on a lake. They really crashed the Lambo into the ice, like they dug an ice trench. So that was all real. Roman was not in the car there, so they did that in a pool, having it flood in and stuff and watching him and all that jazz. So I was surprised at how much of it was really done on a real frozen lake. They had so many safety teams and like ice testers to know how thick the ice was and, all the safety precautions you would expect for a multi-million-dollar film. They really blew up trucks. When the sub crashes through and those trucks fly up, the trucks are really exploding and flying up. The submarine is not there, but they blew those up on an ice area with chunks of ice flying and all that stuff. So that was all real. I appreciate the dedication to practicality for the finale. I wish New York got a bit more of that as well. That was limited because they were in New York. I think if they could have done film somewhere else, they traded the glory of recording in New York City for the practicality that they've been known for the past 7 films. But I appreciate that at least the end here, we get most of that.
And again, because some of the trailers for these other movies are fresh in my head, I know that practicality is something that is only going to continue to fall by the wayside, because in the other movie, we've got a double or triple decker, what are the things called?
18-wheeler?
Yeah, whatever. I see that thing flipping up on its face. I know Dom then rolls a car into a jet or something. Like, it's just gonna fly out the window even more than normal. So
practicality all but leaves the station here in F9 and Hobbs and Shaw. So
we had a good run, everybody. Thank you for it.
Remember when they dragged a real vault through the streets? Remember when it was cool?
I am curious to watch Fast 9, obviously, but I'm not tremendously enthused after watching Fate of the Furious here. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about here when it comes to, I think we've talked about a lot of the stunts and, editing. I don't know if there's anything music-wise. I do feel like music took a huge backseat this time around, especially coming off of Fast 7, which had, obviously the song at the end of the film with, was it The Long Day? I can't see you again. I was like, I don't know why I can't remember the song. Obviously, that was a huge hit. The Fast 7 soundtrack was a huge hit on its own, but this movie I do not feel like had any notable music outside of the score of the movie itself. Like, licensed music felt like it was pretty non-existent, which was a little bizarre.
It's a big bummer.
So
you're not wrong. The soundtrack is, I couldn't tell you anything on it, which is a bummer because most of the other movies I can. So
yeah, most of the other movies there is at least 1 or 2 licensed tracks or songs that were made for the movie that you can point to. I cannot think of any instances of that here with this. before we do go to best car, was there anything else you wanted to talk about in regard to the one lingering thing I'm thinking of? It would just be with Mr. Nobody and his whole crew, and then Little Nobody. Is that his name? That's what they call him. Is there anything you want to say about either of them? I like Kurt Russell more in this movie. I think I've just grown accustomed to what he is within this universe. I like Kurt Russell a lot in general, so I think I was just going to naturally soften on him over time. I don't know if I love Little Nobody. Here's my problem with Little Nobody. It feels like they're like, Paul Walker's out of the scene. We need somebody else young and that can drive a car around with them now that we can put in his role. And I don't feel like he's trying to replace Paul Walker necessarily, but that's kind of how it comes off to some degree.
His naivete, I think, helps a lot. He adds comedic value because he just doesn't know how to do anything. He's learning the rules. The conversations between Mr. Nobody and Hobbs about Little Nobody, pretty funny.
I like that.
It's interesting to just see this kind of character come up and try to be a part of the group, but he doesn't quite fit in because he's too much of a stickler. We'll see how he grows over time, but Mr. Nobody's still great. He's just funny. Like, even at the end of the prison scene, he's like, well, that took longer than I thought. Like, he's the only puppet master I'm cool with in the Fast and Furious universe. Cipher, no. Nobody, yes.
I think part of why he worked more for me this time is because he did have more scenes, quite a few more scenes with Hobbs this time. And I think Kurt Russell and The Rock play off each other quite well, and they had really fun interactions in this movie. So maybe that's why I like him more. I feel like him playing off of Vin Diesel, it's just kind of, I don't know. Like Hobbs is more witty. He's got comebacks. He's snarky. Dom, not so much. So them kind of playing off Mr. Nobody and Dom playing off each other is just kind of bland and boring in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But him and Hobbs are good to work off one another. Same way it is with both Hobbs and Shaw. All right. Best car. This was a hard one because I didn't feel like there was any single... I feel like there's naturally in each of these movies one that you would maybe gravitate towards. If there was any single one like this in that movie, I feel like it might be Roman's Lamborghini at the very end, just because they call so much attention to that.
It's one of my choices. I like the orange.
I like the orange on the Lamborghini too, but it is not my favorite. I can give mine this time. My favorite, and again, this is not a unique car necessarily because we've seen plenty of these in the series so far, and it's a car that one of the main characters drives quite frequently. But I love the look of Letty's 1966 Chevy Corvette Stingray that she has in this movie. The bright red in New York, it's awesome. That is, again, maybe I'm just a sucker for red cars because I bring this up a lot of times. Like, oh, if a car's red, then I'm going to be predisposed to it. But that's my favorite in the movie. I think that car looks awesome. I think that's by far the best car that Letty's ever had in any of these movies.
Weird. It's like we picked the same car.
I feel like there's really no other great choices, though. To be honest,
I'm super partial to Stingrays. I love them. When you put them in red, it's great. It looks good. There are a lot of Dodge Chargers in this movie, including the one at the very end with the EMP and the turbo jet thruster thing that lights on fire. The Bentley, not my taste, but it's a Bentley, either. So it I guess it gets a mention. But the Stingray is definitely my preferred car. It's a cooler cast of cars. The Impala, like Dom's Impala down in Puerto Rico, is pretty cool, but that doesn't get a lot of screen time.
Well, shout out to the crappy, like the bug looking thing that he rides.
The Fleet line.
Yes, that is not what I would call the best car, but just everything with that car is so fun in that sequence. And then him driving it over the finish line and blasting it off the edge into the sea is all great. I think more than anything, that's probably, like, there is no central focus on any single cars in this movie that I can recall too much. The one that gets the most focus and attention on it is probably that opening car he uses in the drag race. Either that or his snowmobile outfitted Charger that Dom drives there at the end. Is
it's that and the Lamborghini.
Central.
Those are the ones that get the biggest screen time.
Yeah. So everything else is pretty passive, and of everything that people were driving, Letty's Stingray really stood out to me quite a bit. So
yeah, real time follow up. It wasn't Puerto Rico, it was Cuba. My bad, got it mixed up.
So yeah, Stingray's best car for Fate of the Furious. Max, this is a weird one, and I don't know if we will even have much to say. I don't know if we'll have much to say in this regard on our next couple episodes, to be completely honest, because they're so fresh. And that's the legacy. What is the legacy of Fate of the Furious? And I personally don't have a great answer. I mean, it's the first movie without Paul Walker. I don't know if people really think about it in that way.
That's one of the things I had written down.
It's definitely a key component, but of the movie itself, I don't know. I think within the larger series, obviously, this is the one where Cipher, Charlize enters the picture, which I know ends up being a huge thing moving forward. Honestly, this movie's legacy is probably just that it set up Hobbs and Shaw to be a thing in a lot of ways. Because that's the next movie chronologically that we're going to watch here for Chapter Select. It's the next one that came out in the series as well. I don't know. There's no real lasting legacy or singular thing that people glean onto with this movie, I would say.
In universe, some big ones would be Brian, as in the son. So he's introduced, that, adding to the family in that way. Outside of the universe, first one without Paul. It's the last Dwayne Johnson mainline Fast and Furious movie, and likely will be. He's not in Fast X, and the odds of him returning for the 11th film are super, super small.
That was one thing I did want to mention real quick. Sorry to butt in, but it is very funny that the last mainline movie featuring both Dwayne Johnson and Vin Diesel is one where their characters are at odds with each other for the entirety of the movie. It's like art reflects life there. Because we obviously know that they do not like one another. I wonder if that was somewhat of an idea from the scriptwriter's perspective. Like, oh, we know that Vin and Dwayne don't like one another. What if we just made the movie one where they're at odds with each other once again, and they don't really fight at any single point in this movie or have any. They're actually not in a lot of the same scenes in this movie, the more I think about it. So I wonder if that, I don't know. I'm curious. I'm very fascinated by that whole beef between the two of them, but it is funny that they're on opposite sides of the spectrum throughout most of this movie, even when they don't like one another in real life.
Yeah. The other legacy is what you said, birth of Hobbs and Shaw, and it's like what we said at the top. The other legacy is they screwed up the name of the movie. They didn't put an 8 in the title. Beyond that, it's a bummer, but it also made $1.2 billion. So it's coming off of that, and you'll notice with the grossing amounts of our next two movies how this all plays out.
Well, how much did we'll get there obviously, but I assume Fast 9 made less money because of pandemic things, but maybe I'm wrong. Because that movie came out in 2021, if I am correct, right? Because they had to hold on to it for after pandemic things.
Yes, F9 came out June 25th of 2021, so they postponed it from 2020 to 21, and it was still kind of in that early time where movie theaters were open, but not everyone was going back to the theater necessarily. Yeah. So we'll discuss that here at the end of season 4.
I do, just to go back really quickly to the title and to hone in on this very goofy thing with the title not being F8 of the Furious for Fate of the Furious. I'm wondering why they decided against that, because you have to guess that somebody working on the title of this movie suggested that be a thing. And I'm going to assume that an executive was like, no, we can't do that because fans won't understand it, blah, 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 blah. And if that was the reasoning, what's funny is that the next movie in the series is literally called F9. So they clearly have no problem just making the title structure be F whatever. Like, fans will get it. So why not F8 of the Furious? Like, it would have been so much better. They did it immediately with the next one. They just shortened to F9, the Fast Saga, which is maybe the worst title of the whole bunch, if we're being honest. So it's painful that they wouldn't do F8 of the Furious when they just totally in the next movie ended up going for it. So bad on you, Universal. Bad on whoever made that call.
All right. I think that does it for Fate of the Furious. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to follow the show on Twitter, you can at Chapter Select. You can follow Logan on Twitter at Moreman12 and his writing over at comicbook.com. You can follow myself on Twitter at MaxRoberts143 and my writing over at maxfrequency.net. And until next time, adios. Chapter Select is a Max Frequency production. This episode was researched, produced, and edited by me, Max Roberts. Season 4 is hosted by Logan Moore and myself. Season 4 is all about the Fast and the Furious. For more on this season, go to chapterselect.com/season 4. Follow the show at Chapter Select and check out previous seasons at chapterselect.com.